Welcome, 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 and thank you for spending some of your time with us. My name is Tina Rosenquist, and this is Knowledge for Wellness. And this show is to better inform you, because the more information you have, the better decisions you can make. And today I am delighted to present Cassie Wellness. She's from Weight and Wellness, and you have 3 different locations.
Yes.
Welcome, Cassie.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the welcome. It's great to be here.
Yes.
And we are located in St. Paul. That was the first business that opened up years ago, but our need, I guess, continues to spread, and so we now have offices in Wayzata and White Bear Lake as well.
Okay, that's great. Well, when people think of pain, and we're going to do a segment on pain and inflammation, which will be fabulous, but I know when I think of pain, I watched my mom with her arthritis, you know, the fingers, things like that, the inflammation. And now, you know, now there's some insight on that actually with nutrition, that you can actually probably relieve a lot of that pain. And since you are a registered dietitian, I wanted to bring you on the show to enhance our viewers about some things. I know that there's a lot of prescriptions out there, over-the-counter medications, supplements, things like that, but I personally am not a pill taker.
Me either.
You know, and I'd rather get the nutrition from the food that I eat. You know, not only am I making myself healthier, but then my immune system's going to go from the inside out,
right,
instead of the quick drug, which is going to come out of my body within probably 24 hours. So
right, and always side effects with any prescription drug that you're going to take. So I love your philosophy. That's what I like to live by too, that least number of pills you can put in your mouth, the best, and just use the power of real foods. And that's probably a new thought for a lot of people, that foods can help decrease pain and inflammation, but they absolutely can. And one of the things that comes to the top of my mind, if somebody were to say, what is the culprit here when we talk about the link with food and the arthritis, or, you know, pain and inflammation isn't just arthritis. It could also be asthma, because that's inflammation of the lungs. Severe headaches, that's often inflammation. Cardiovascular disease is inflammation in your blood vessels. High blood pressure. So we really need to think more broad, and there are lots of areas of pain and inflammation that people are suffering from, and one of the main culprits is sugar.
Oh, yes, it seems to be everywhere. And even when I went and visited over in Europe, you know, you'd see this delicious chocolate cake, you know, and you'd want it. And then you'd sit down with it and take a bite, and oh my gosh, it did not have as much sugar in it.
Right.
So you also notice that people over there weren't as heavy as the people here, or they were a little bit healthier too.
Isn't that the truth? I visited Europe a while back, and people said to me before I went that you're going to notice people are skinnier over there. They just look healthier. And I thought, oh, you know, maybe, but it probably won't be that visual. But oh my Lord, it was that visual. You just you know, the minute you step off the plane.
They walk everywhere. They walk to the trains. Everywhere they go, they have their little buggies with their bicycles in it, you know.
With the little bells. But they move more, which is a huge piece of it. And they eat fresher foods too, because they're walking to the market a lot of time to get the fresh food. So they don't have as much sugar. You know, you mentioned that cake, and that first bite, you could tell it wasn't as sickeningly sweet as some of our products here. But I want to have viewers think even beyond that cake, because it's things like the cold cereal that you're eating in the morning. And some cold cereals look a lot healthier than others, but I always say to my clients, there is no cold cereal that works for your body. Whether they look healthy on the front of the box or not, they're turning to a lot of sugar. And I did the math on this particular type of cereal, although again, I'm not picking on Smart Start, it's all cold cereals, but a serving of this cold cereal, 2 cups, which I think is about the average what one person would eat, turns into 20 teaspoons of sugar in your system.
That's a lot for your body to digest. And
if you have arthritis, I guarantee you're going to feel pain an hour or less after that type of a breakfast. Another one is a bagel. You know, and talk about portion distortion here. Half this size maybe wouldn't be so bad, but this is what most people eat when they sit down to have a bagel. one bagel turns into nearly 15 teaspoons of sugar.
Wow.
In your system. That's without the jelly that you might spread on top. That's just more sugar.
Or the cream cheese.
Or, yeah, you know, there's always the toppings. Potato chips. My colleague was telling me that as she drove to work, I think it was last Wednesday, the bus stop where the kids were gathering, this one little kid, she said he couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, standing there with a big bag of Doritos, not this little bag, munching off of it.
In the morning?
In the morning, waiting for the bus.
Oh.
And she said, I bet that was his breakfast. And I bet she was right.
Yeah.
You know, you're just setting your kids up to have problems down the road. And maybe they have problems now, like I mentioned, asthma. More kids today than 10, 20 years ago have asthma. And you can bet there's a link to all the processed carbs, which then turn to sugar. And that creates the inflammation in the lungs, or in the joints, or in the blood vessels.
Well, yeah, that makes sense because, you know, sugars. What other foods, you know, causes the people with the pain and inflammations?
The other huge category is trans fats.
Okay.
And when you were talking about Europe, it reminded me that in Europe, they don't even let trans fats in the country.
Oh, the FDA?
Right. You cannot go to the grocery store, let alone a restaurant. You know, I think it was maybe 2008 when New York banned any restaurants from using trans fats, and we all thought, oh, wow, that's so great, that's so healthy. But look at Europe. As a country, they don't even let it in.
Oh, wow.
And that should say something. It is that harmful, and it certainly can cause pain and inflammation. Now, things that would have the trans fats in them would be the potato chips.
Sure.
Or a store-bought muffin.
Oh.
When you think of the middle aisles of the grocery store, most of the stuff has trans fats.
Or processed.
Right, the processed foods, because one of the things it does is adds shelf life. So the food manufacturers, you know, it benefits them if that product can sit on the shelf or in the warehouse longer.
Yeah, well, you know the joke about the Twinkies. They don't have an expiration date on them.
Which isn't that scary. You know, that reminds me when I was a kid, I remember we had margarine. And it's not that my mom was being a bad mom. She just, that was the talk of the time, that you're not supposed to do butter.
Oh,
now
no.
we know different.
Yes.
That you should do this margarine because it doesn't have all the cholesterol. Well, now we know it has trans fats. But I remember thinking it was so cool that that margarine could sit on our shelf out in the open for weeks and we'd still eat it. And my cousin, 2 miles down the road, they had butter in their fridge.
Sure.
You know, it had to be kept in the fridge or it would go bad, and it was always hard as a rock. Well, now looking back at that, that should have scared me, that that food could sit out like that. That's not real food.
No.
Just like the Twinkies are not real food.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, if someone has a lot of pain and inflammation, what do you recommend that they eat? If you're saying not to eat these, can you give some suggestions for them to eat then?
Absolutely. You know, bottom line, long story short, eat real food, but some people don't really know what that is anymore. It's beginning to be kind of a fuzzy line. So I brought a few examples of eat this, not that.
Okay.
Kind of stealing
our own
that.
knowledge for wellness, eat this, not that. I love that.
Our own,
okay,
because we're not going by the books. I
No.
think it's a great concept, but we have some different ideas than the popular book called Eat This, Not That.
Yeah, well, that's great to share that with our viewers, so then they'll be up on it a little bit more, you know, especially from you, a registered dietitian. What better person to tell them?
Right.
You know?
So one thing that I brought, starting with the first meal of the day, which is the most important, I brought some pancakes.
Okay.
Now, my husband could certainly sit down to that many pancakes. I'm hoping not too many people are dishing up that many.
And it looks like we have margarine on there too.
So there's the trans fats, pancakes made from white flour, which turns to a lot of sugar. And then most people, you know, a real maple syrup that you can find in the natural section isn't so bad, but I don't think a lot of people realize that exists.
Oh,
We're pulling
exactly.
maple syrup, what we think is maple syrup, and it's high fructose corn syrup. So we're adding more sugar, more fuel to the fire, I like to say, when we talk of pain and inflammation. So don't eat that.
Right.
If you don't have aches and pains immediately, I guarantee you by 10 a.m. you're going to be hitting rock bottom, wanting a nap, not feeling very energetic.
Yeah, a lot of sugar here.
A lot of sugar
A lot
there.
of sugar here.
A much better option would be